As mentioned previously, stop motion sequences images to create the illusion of motion. To have these images though, you have to have a camera. Just like any other type of film, the camera is the most important tool for stop motion animation. There are many different types of cameras that you can use for stop motion, from webcams, to digital cameras, to high-end DSLRs, and even your smartphone. For this portion of the series, I'm going to be using a DSLR camera, but I'm also going to be discussing many components that will apply to all types of cameras. So even if you aren't using a DSLR, there is still a lot that you can utilize with any camera that you are using. It is really important to have your camera stationary. Any movement with the camera can really break the illusion of animation. When the frames of your scene are offset, your stop motion can look jerky, as you can see here. Have your camera mounted however best you can. We will touch on this more in the next section, table setup. Another recommendation is having your camera powered through an AC adapter. This way you won't have to move your camera to switch batteries. I also suggest using an image capture software or some type of device that allows you to capture images without touching the camera. Especially with DSLRs and other high-end cameras, there are many components to the camera to consider. Shutter speed, ISO, aperture, and even lenses. Though not all cameras allow for the user to adjust these, it is still important to know how they work because these can affect one another. The rest of this portion will be devoted to explaining how these components work and relate to one another. If you are already familiar with photography or don't have a camera with which you can adjust these functions, feel free to skip ahead to the next portion, which is table setup. But I recommend watching the rest of this portion because it can really give you an understanding on how to improve your animations. Shutter speed is how long you allow the light of your shot to enter the camera. If your image is dark, try slowing down your shutter speed. If your image is too bright, try speeding up your shutter speed. ISO determines the quality of your image. It is how sensitive your camera is to light. The lower the ISO, the better the quality. The higher the ISO, the grainier your image will look. For best results, film with the lowest ISO you possibly can. Aperture or f-stop is the size of the iris opening. Although this can affect how much light gets to your camera sensor, it more so determines your depth of field. A shallow depth of field focuses on your subject while the background is out of focus. Meanwhile, a wide depth of field keeps both your subject and your background in focus together. To understand how this works, imagine a camera aimed at a subject. These lines are a representation of the edges of the iris to the middle focal point of your subject. If the lines continue, they form this X shape. Now imagine this blue represents what is in focus. As the iris opens wider, the edges of the blue get closer together. As the iris gets smaller, the blue is squeezed and the edges of the blue get further apart. Essentially, a wide iris gives a shallow depth of field. A small iris gives a wider depth of field. Another important component to consider is focal length, which is the distance between the camera lens and the camera sensor. This is really important because this is something that can change the way your shot looks. The closer that the lens is to the sensor, the more it will stretch out your scene. Conversely, as the lens and the camera sensor get further apart, your image will become more and more flat. As mentioned earlier, these camera settings can and will affect one another. Aperture affects the amount of light entering the camera, which will affect your shutter speed. One great thing about stop motion though is that you are not taking photographs of moving subjects, you're taking photographs of still subjects. This means that you can set your ISO to its lowest possible setting to get a really clear shot. From there, it's just a matter of determining if you want a shallow or wide depth of field. If you have a shallow depth of field and it's a little too bright, just speed up your shutter speed. Conversely, if you have a wide depth of field and it's a little too dark, just slow down your shutter speed. Lenses come in a variety of shapes and sizes, allowing for a variety of focal lengths. Lenses also vary in types. If you can, play around with different types of lenses. Maybe you'd like the way a wide-angle lens looks, or maybe you'd like how a macro lens looks. Whatever the case may be, understanding how your camera works, understanding all of its functions and lenses, can really change the dynamics of your animations. We will come back to camera functions when we discuss lighting and white balance in part 5, Lighting Your Scene. Hey guys, if you like this video, please like, share, and subscribe. You can also help support this channel through Patreon, which is linked down below. Thank you.